Hello and welcome to Rotted Reviews, and today I am doing a little bit better. I fully admit, yesterday was a rough one as far as getting myself up off the floor after being beaten down the day previous and actually getting to work, and today I find myself in a better place. And I think I attribute some of that to watching a Christmas horror movie last night that wasn't god-awful dreadful. And the movie I'm talking about is the 2021 film Red Snow. Written and directed by Sean Nichols Lynch, this is a quiet little movie about Olivia, who is an aspiring author that mostly writes romantic vampire stories. She's currently living in her remote cabin out in Lake Tahoe, where she's isolated and just working on her next book. With a kitchen drawer full of rejection letters and hope still remaining in her heart, she finds herself a bit surprised when a bat flies against the house and appears to be injured. Once she takes it in and tends to its wounds with band-aids out in the garage, she's suddenly surprised to find that in the place of the bat is now a naked vampire. And what kind of transpires from there is the story of these two characters as they're getting to know one another. The vampire is being hunted down. There's other subplots that kind of come into play, but really the movie is centrally fixed on these two characters and their interactions. This was made available as a VOD release on December 6th in a number of countries, including the UK, Ireland, Australia, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Korea, and more, and is going to be available in the United States as VOD and physical copy on the 28th. Regardless, a little VPN happiness, and I did manage to check this one out. And I'm pleased to say that overall, I thought it was pretty cute. That's not to say that I thought it was great, just cute. You see, this really is kind of a simplistic storyline with simplistic characters on top. And I'd be lying if I said that it really reaches any level of major depth. I wasn't exactly bracing myself for awfulness, but I was kind of bracing myself for some low budget, well, let's just say some common mistakes, and this does fall into several of those. However, I think it was the main character's performance of Olivia, played by Denise Sinceros, that kind of won me over. I found myself warming up to the film in a way that I really wasn't expecting to. It was reminding me a bit of my attitude as I was watching the 2012 movie I Am a Ghost, or the 2020 movie A Ghost Waits, where the first 5 minutes of it, you kind of see the style and you kind of brace yourself for a little bit of low-budget, amateurish awfulness. Just kind of the way that the film is unfurled, the way that the characters are interacting in front of the camera. It just feels a little bit stilted, a little bit raw, not as well refined. And then eventually, all of a sudden, you kind of realize that, hey, this has some heart to it. And I will say that Red Snow does not achieve the same level of cinematic quality that those two previous entries I mentioned did. However, it still kind of warmed my heart. Denise Cisneros playing Olivia was not entirely a well-fleshed-out performance of a well-fleshed-out character. However, there was a charm to it. She wasn't afraid at all to really just allow herself to be the world's biggest dork. And I think that fit the Olivia character extraordinarily well. It was funny, it was cute, it was charming, and to my pleasant surprise, I found myself smiling as she's going through this performance, just making a goofball of herself. And so the question at that point kind of becomes, well, what went wrong? I mean, I just mentioned that this didn't achieve the same level of cinematic quality as the others. I mentioned that it was cute, but it wasn't great. So what aspects of this didn't work? Well, honestly, there were several, and I'm kind of taking a lot of my bias against vampires and really putting it off to the side as much as I possibly can and really evaluating this on an objective level. And this kind of fell into some pretty nasty trope holes. I think it's been a bit of a tired cliche when you meet a character or a creature that has a lot of cinematic history, such as vampires, werewolves, things like that. And yeah, you kind of need to establish the rules. And that's one thing that Olivia really tries to do as she's interviewing Luke and trying to establish, well, what about garlic? What about holy water? What about crosses? So on and so forth. That's not necessarily the tired trope, although I do think that revealing those kind of things takes a little bit more nuance than this movie applied. No, the trope that I'm referring to is the rolling of the eyes because of cinematic knowledge. When you have a character in your film that's interviewing a vampire and they're asking them, well, what about garlic? flick and they roll their eyes and say, "You've seen too many vampire movies." And it's like, you know what? Slow your roll there. Let's just be a little bit more self-reflective about the reality of this. I would honestly rather have no rules. I would, okay, have it addressed, but have a situation where it's like, why would I tell you the best method in which I could die? That honestly makes a lot of sense to me. I don't necessarily need it spelled out for me as the audience. Play around with it a little bit more. Make it a little bit more organic. It's another example of show don't tell. And this movie falls into a lot of those traps. And like I was mentioning yesterday about motivation, this movie is a little bit lackluster in that regard as well. It kind of felt a little bit less like having fully fleshed out, organic, realized characters, putting conflict in front of them, and then trying to think about how those characters would overcome that, what are the next logical steps that they would take, and then maybe employ some surprises on top of it. Instead, it kind of felt a little bit more like we know how we want them to end up, we know what decisions we want them to make, so how can we shoehorn their personalities into making that happen? And what we wind up with is a storyline that is kind of 2 parts predictable and 1 part pretty fucking confusing. There were some pretty major gaps in terms of character logic that were going on here, and it just kind of wound up being shoehorned into, well, I guess that leads us to this place, which really kind of seems like that's where the filmmaker wanted to go, however weird and winding that path that takes us there might get. There are a few reasons that I'm not going to give this movie a full blanket recommendation, and not the least of which is how small it is. Small in budget, small in scope, small in characters, small in vision, and if I were a realtor trying to be a little bit generous about this, I would call this movie cozy. But that's kind of what this movie is. It's a remote cabin like Olivia lives in with a stone hearth and not a whole lot of amenities. It's warm, it's cozy, it's friendly, it's inviting, but I don't know if I would want to live there full time. Even so, this did have some heart, and if you are in the mood for a small movie that kind of goofs around a little bit and does have some tired cliches, but is otherwise fairly enjoyable, I do recommend the 2021 movie Red Snow. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I look forward to seeing you on my next review. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror movie, first make sure that it's good and rotted.